Well, election 2025 is now well and truly underway. The Prime Minister has fired the starter's gun. Australians will be off to the polls on May the 3rd. And everyone seems to agree this campaign will really matter in the sense that the race is close, that any stumbles, any bad days or bad weeks could absolutely cost one side the actual election result. So the pressure is on both Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. I'm keen to explore what actually goes on behind the scenes. Once a campaign begins, what are the strategies, the tactics, the concerns, and how do you manage a leader in a campaign contest? I'm David Speers on Ngunnawal Country at Parliament House in Canberra. Welcome to Insiders on Background. Well, Brian Liddell is Managing Partner at Principal Advisory. He's former Chief of Staff to then Labor Leader, Bill Shorten. Andrew Carswell is Managing Director at Headline Advisory, a former Press Secretary to then Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Welcome to you both. It's been a while. Good to catch up at the start of another campaign. Really appreciate you joining us. Look, Ryan, let me come to you first. I'm keen to sort of peel back the curtain a little bit here and get an insight into what goes on at the start of a campaign. Right, the first few days. Are you still trying to find your feet, get the machine running, or how does it begin?
One of the things which is really interesting as you sort of transition from governing to campaigning. Spearsy for both sides, both the government and the opposition, they transition from a traditional sort of government. So for the government's perspective, cabinet ministers, etc., coordinated by the Prime Minister's office to a CHQ, they call it, central headquarters, and that basically
means
means
different people, right? That's different personnel who have a sort of different job description.
That's right. And so, the campaign, this year's obviously been, for the Labor Party, has been run by Paul Erickson, the National Secretary of the Labor Party, and then for the Libs, Andrew Hurst. And so that really sort of goes to the type of, structure you'll have for the next sort of 36 days for the campaign going forward. Everything's sort of driven by politics. People are driven by announceables and getting things out the door. And that coordination really goes through CHQ. And it's funny because the principals, so in this case, Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton, kind of become part of the campaign as opposed to running the campaign from the top.
Right,
so the travelling party on the various planes sort of bounce around marginal seats doing announceables. They're coordinated by the central headquarters in the same way that each minister is sort of coordinated. And for the opposition, obviously each shadow. And then there's various teams within those headquarters that focus on things like target seats, like, the seats which, both parties are sort of looking for every vote to win, advertising, legals, all that sort of stuff, and research. So it's a real sort of a significant sort of transition across from the traditional sort of government structure
into a campaign team.
Into a campaign team.
It's really interesting to me, and look, maybe this is a sensitive question, I don't know, but to you, Andrew, are there tensions between those that are around the leader for the parliamentary term, then having to cede control to those who actually run the campaign, or is that pretty seamless?
Well, I think it just depends how much you trust your leader at CHQ. And in terms of ours, it's Andrew Hurst, and Scott had a great admiration for Andrew and a great trust. And you have to have that trust because you're ceding a lot of, your power, so to speak, on where you go, what to say, to party headquarters. So it really depends on the dynamic between the principal and the leader at CHQ as to where that goes. It'll be interesting to see where it goes for the coalition this time. I mean, Peter Dutton's team have not done a campaign before, so they're going in with no ideas about how it runs day to day, whereas Andrew Hurst has been there for a long period of time.
But, I mean, both of you guys were with leaders doing their first campaign as leader, right? What was sort of unexpected? What were they not ready for, Andrew? Is there anything that jumps to mind that it was like, okay, weren't expecting this element of being in a campaign, and we're going to have to learn this quickly?
Yeah, I think policy formation is one of the things that was a surprise for us in the first campaign. Just being able to have things to say at certain moments during the campaign. You don't need to have a new policy every day, of course, and you'd be silly to waste them. But you need one every third or fourth day to be able to sustain momentum and to give you something broader to say than your key messages throughout the campaign. So policy formation was a little bit hatched together, I guess, in that first campaign. We're a little bit better at it come 2022, but that was one of the things that I noticed.
Yeah, well, you still had that miracle win though in 2019, and to remember people, remind people of that. But Ryan, what about you? Were there any unexpected surprises once you got into the campaign?
I think the thing that really shocked me initially, and I guess the first campaign I did with Bill as leader was in 2016, and this was Malcolm Turnbull's famous 8-week, 56-day campaign, which seemed like an eternity when we were in the middle of it. Was just the energy required to sustain that momentum, and it's 7 days a week. Every morning, 4:30, 5 a.m. sort of starts, checking in with headquarters. What are the issues running today? Where are we going? What do we need to worry about? And then your sort of day gets underway. Before you know it, it's 9, 10 o'clock and you feel like you've lived the whole day already. And this is while you've got a whole plane load of press gallery journalists with you. So, you've got 8, 9 cameras, like 20 journos watching every sort of...
a lot. They're demanding a lot. They want to know what's coming up, what they're doing. But people will be fascinated by this, right? So the day begins literally 4:30, 5 o'clock, every day, and runs through till when?
Well, it kind of depends. If you used the Malcolm Turnbull model of campaign, it ran through till about 10 a.m. and then he took the afternoon off, which was one of the main criticisms of his campaign. But
wasn't he fundraising or something in the afternoons?
Yeah, that's right.
Very Biden-esque, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Generally, I mean, I was trying to think back before I sort of came on, David, about how we sort of did things in 2016 and 2019. It was you'd sort of pre-position wherever you're going to be the night before, and so you sort of get organised for the day, for the next day. Usually I'd check in with headquarters at 4:30, 5 a.m. What are the issues running? What do we think we need to respond to? What do we think the day sort of looks like from here? Then you'd get up and have a phone call with the leader and the principals and the campaign sort of directors, sort of just after 6, and the day would sort of start to get going. But in terms of leader's responsibilities, invariably he'd probably go up to some morning radio. You might try and get some pictures out there of him walking, running, playing tennis, playing soccer, whatever. And then you'd have your press conference generally in the morning to try and sort of drive that kind of morning sort of news cycle at 9, 10 o'clock. And then try and do something in the community sort of early afternoon, and then pre-position for next day. And later in the afternoon.
That fatigue factor is a really important one, isn't it, Andrew, to keep wary of. You need to get sleep, you've got to eat well, you've got to try and look after yourself as much as you can through a pretty gruelling exercise. And I guess you guys have to keep an eye on the leader as well and make sure they're, being looked after.
Yeah, it's a hard journey, and I think the early mornings are a killer initially, but you do settle into a rhythm. But I think you've got to have lighter moments in your campaign as well to give you that energy. And we spent a lot of time working within our team to provide those lighter moments, those moments where you can relax and switch off. It's not go to woe for the entire day. As Ryan said, it's very much focused on that morning session and smashing through the media in the morning and getting your message right. It gets a little bit in the afternoon. It's quite relaxed in the afternoon because you find yourself waiting for the next event, and when you've got the press pack with you, it's kind of like they leapfrog you and to the next event, and you can't go there ahead of them, so you have to sit and wait in a cafe. So there's actually a lot of time just sitting around twiddling your thumbs and waiting for media events to be set up.
What about the added element now of influencers that we know are going to be on the campaign and keen for content, and both leaders are going to be keen to be doing podcasts and talking to, not traditional media only. Is that going to make them busier?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. And I actually don't mind this. I know the coalition have jumped up and down about it, but they should be getting their own influencers in. I mean, there's plenty of them. There's nothing wrong with that approach that Anthony Albanese is taking. I commend it. Politics is about reaching audiences that don't necessarily connect in traditional senses. Yeah. So it adds another dynamic to it. It brings in more people that would traditionally switch off from a campaign. I think that's great.
A couple of other things about a campaign. mixing it with voters, right? The unscripted moments, the risk and reward, I suppose. Leaders always say we love meeting, ordinary Australians. The greatest part of the campaign is working your way around talking to Australians. I'm sure they're genuine about that, but there must, Ryan, also be an element of sheer panic when you're just not sure what might happen that could ruin your day, ruin your week on the campaign.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and and to your point, David, it is a sort of real risk reward sort of decision process you go through. You're always searching for those perfect pitches, the pitches that'll beat your opposition numbers sort of pitches for the day. You go into a shopping centre, particular areas, you kind of get a bit of a vibe for when you sort of go in about whether it could sort of go pear-shaped pretty quickly. But then it also, to Andrew's point, it kind of depends on the principal who you're working with. If you're someone like Bill, for example, like he was a real sort of confidence player. He got his energy off people. He spent his life, working with unions and all that. So his happy place is out there talking to punters, talking to people. So you take that small risk for the reward of having the good pitches and the good energy that it feeds in to his campaign to keep his sort of personal confidence going as well. And the more sort of stage managed it looks, like the more cynical the journos get too, and the less likely you are to sort of get a decent run, or worse than that, get a smash up on the news at night.
What about these things we're seeing more and more of? They're kind of like mini campaign launches. They're not the full blown thing, but it's kind of a bit American style politics where you have the party supporters with their T-shirts and it's in the round, and there might be one in Adelaide, there might be one in Brisbane. Andrew, do those things work, or do they look too stage managed?
No, they're purely designed to show momentum to the public that aren't coming along from the right every day, so they don't see that. So it is purely designed as a showcase moment to show momentum, that there's energy, there's a crowd there, even though they're all supporters. It's really that's the point, and it's also designed for the leader to look prime ministerial, to look down the lens and give the 1, 2, 3 messages in a clear space. So it's all designed for those moments. You win the images and you win the day when it comes to campaigning, and those moments are pivotal to showing the public that there is momentum here.
And what about debates? Full disclosure, we're very much hoping to be hosting a debate on the ABC in this election campaign. How much work goes in? How much concentration and concern and prep is there ahead of a campaign event like a debate, Andrew? And do they matter?
Probably too much attention goes into them, to be honest. The leader would travel with a book that goes through the angles that need to be exploited, the messages that need to be put forward, and you do a lot of scenario planning for what can go on wrong or right on those occasions, and the points that you need to hit against the other leader as well. So there's a lot of attention, there's a lot of planning that goes into them. They are not comfortable, to be honest, for anyone, leader included. No leader really enjoys those moments, but because they know that they are important. If the public would maybe tune in for 2 or 3 moments during a campaign, and usually one of those is a debate.
Yeah, Ryan, what are your memories of those moments?
Oh, mostly traumatic, Dave. No, I'm kidding. It's Andrew's right. The amount of prep that goes into it for like an hour, debate is extraordinary. It's like weeks beforehand. You got a whole range of policy issues, particularly the more popular format, which are the people's forums now. They're really good insofar as one of the things we did with Bill was embark on a bit of a town hall strategy. So he went around to a whole stack of marginal seats and met punters, took questions, and that made him quite match fit when it came to debates, really sort of punching through and be able to sort of get his point across.
Yeah, and being match fit, did either of you, let's be honest, do any of that rehearsing where you got someone pretending to be the other guy doing a dummy debate, Ryan?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
And it's interesting when you've got, people who or unnamed people who may have been senior members of Bill's front bench standing up, pretending to be Scott Morrison, absolutely eviscerating Bill Shorten.
Who did Scott Morrison?
I think we had Dreyfus. Was it Mark Dreyfus? So Dreyfus was Turnbull. I'm sorry, I can't remember who we had Morrison, because Dreyfus did the quintessential sort of QC type.
yeah, of
Exactly,
course,
that's right.
of course. And what about
so
on
it
your
worked well.
side, Andrew? Were there any names you can name who did the
I
dummy
actually
debates?
can't remember who stood in for who. I mean, we do this in pretty much every time that we front the media. We take the place of journalists in that preparation, and Scott was always very, very keen to do a dummy press conference before every press conference. And right? I think it was a very good discipline for a leader to learn, because you need to hear how things sound when they come out. And Scott was very good at listening to that, taking advice, and putting things in his brain that he knew he could draw from at that moment when that question came. So any leader that's not doing that prep is not perhaps not doing a good enough job in terms of protecting themselves.
Really interesting point. So I'm keen to get both of your thoughts on this campaign that's just begun. We've heard the opening pitches, a lot of cost of living focus from both, a lot of, here is the choice, framing the choice from both Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. Ryan, how do you see this one starting this campaign? Who has the edge, do you think? Who has the clearest, the best opening pitch?
I think it's interesting if you take a step back and think about 3 weeks ago, Tropical Cyclone Alfred, things were thrown up in the air. All the conventional the commentary coming from Canberra was this was a huge disadvantage for the government. Now, to their credit, to the PM and Treasurer's credit, they pivoted quite well, pulled some announcements forward in relation to health, and really seized that momentum. And I think heading into budget week, and having spent the week in Canberra in budget week talking to MPs, there is a real sense of momentum shift. They're all walking back or heading back to their electorates today, feeling much better about the world than they were maybe a month ago. With unexpected messages around, like Labor's now the party of lower taxes, which I don't think anyone saw coming. So to the government's credit, they've pivoted, they've done well in that respect. But that momentum can shift really quickly. A mistake on the campaign trail can change things overnight or in that moment. And it's how you deal with that. So perfect example being, the first week of the 2022 campaign, Prime Minister forgot the number, the interest rate number.
Unemployment rate, or was it
it was the
interest rate number?
I think it was interest rates, yeah. And so that was obviously a clear stuff up. Within hours, he was out doing another doorstop, trying to quarterize it, because the last thing you want is for this to go on, to kick it along in the process, etc. Now that hung around probably a little bit longer than anyone from the Labor Party would have liked, but that was the best way possible to quarterise, move on. Tomorrow's the next day, and that's I think that's the real lesson in campaigns that I learned, is that stuff's going to go wrong. You don't get to control stuff; it's going to go wrong. It's how you deal with it, and move forward onto the next thing, so you can start resetting and start setting the agenda again.
I mean, that's an interesting reminder of that last campaign and Anthony Albanese's early struggles with some of those facts and figures. I'll ask you this one too, Andrew, but Ryan, what is the biggest clanger in a campaign that you might have been involved in, and how do you recover from it? What's your darkest memory? Can I go there?
Well, not a clanger, but the darkest memory I have was pre-2019 on Thursday, when it was Thursday afternoon about 3 o'clock, and I got a call from Bob Hawke's family that he'd passed away, and that the optics of the campaign, as Andrew knows, it was 2 days before polling day. The momentum was going in a particular direction. Bill had a pre-record with Lee Sales lined up for 7:30. That was at 6 o'clock. We couldn't go public with the news until after all the family were notified. So we got the news. Bill was devastated. I was devastated. We couldn't let on that we were devastated. We couldn't let people know. Then he had to go. We had to drive him down to studios, overseas studios down to Harris Street in Sydney, and do this interview with Lee Sales, where he was absolutely beside himself with devastation. Everyone else was mucking around, saying, "Oh, the election's on Saturday. How are you feeling?" And
he couldn't talk about it.
Couldn't talk about it. And then she ran the interview at 7:30, and I spoke to her subsequently. She reckons it was one of the best ones he'd ever done. And then as the interview ended, they broke the news about Bob. But he did that whole interview with that context, and you just can't. You got to deal with the circumstances that get served up to you. And I think he did pretty well with that one.
Yeah, well, Andrew, let me come to you on just that one before we get your thoughts on this campaign. What's the the worst moment that you can recall on the campaign trail, and how do you deal with it?
Well, it was probably a certain candidate from Lions. You might remember Speers in 19, where she had said some rather nasty things online, and we instead of cutting the head off there and then, like we probably should have done, we tried to wade through it and protect her and keep her there, because a couple of days before we got the numbers for that seat that showed that we were 53, 47 ahead in that seat. We were going to win that seat. So to get rid of her effectively would have meant that we'd lose that seat. So we tried to soldier on, and
It's a
that
tough
proved
call, that, right? I mean, do you
it proved
sacrifice that
disastrous.
seat for the good of the national campaign or not? I mean, they're not easy decisions, I'm guessing.
They're not, and I think the first principles here you've got to get through a crisis as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And if you don't kill that moment right there and then, it'll prolong for days, and then it might not affect things in that seat necessarily, but it will play in Melbourne and Sydney very poorly. So you've got to get through that quickly, and that occasion we didn't, and we had that debacle at AgFest near Launceston where the media pounced, and you can tell when the media pack is going to pounce. You can they communicate without saying anything. They buy each other off, and they pounced big time, and it cost us a good 3 days of momentum.
Ouch. All right, then, Andrew, your thoughts on this campaign, how it's begun, and what do you think will ultimately decide this contest? Because I think everyone agrees this is close and the campaign will matter. It will really matter what happens the next 5 weeks. What should we keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think the campaign will matter more than probably any other campaign that I've come across, and that's based on the fact that there is such a massive proportion of soft voters, the biggest that I've ever seen. It's in the order of 40 to 45% of voters that are still on the fence. And the difficulty that the coalition have is not the fact that they are 20 seats behind. They need to hold on to or claw back to that they originally had. It's a massive task in that sense alone. But when you drill down on where the soft vote actually sits, it skews very much towards Labor. Now, there's a chunk within that soft vote that perhaps traditional Labor voters that would usually maybe park their vote with the Greens when they're disappointed with Labor. They're not going to do that this time, so they're still in no man's land. So this campaign does matter in terms of being able to claw those people back. If you're Peter Dutton, it's not about throwing bones to the right. It's not about solidifying the base. It's about pulling back those soft voters one by one on every day of the campaign. And that's a difficult ask, but it kind of defines the battleground. This is where they should be focused on. And look, the coalition have had a pretty rough couple of weeks, missteps. They've had brain farts. They've had colleagues disagreeing with each other and policy going backwards and forth. I actually think that's to their advantage because it happened before the campaign. It actually, if that happened, week 2 of the campaign, they'd be done. They'd be done and dusted. But now that it's happened, it's actually it sharpens their resolve. It sharpens their focus. It sharpens their discipline, so they can go into a campaign and go, "We're not going to be like that. We're not going to be ill-disciplined." And they've proved to be disciplined all the way through their campaign until the term until those last couple of weeks. But this really hones them and gets them focused on the right issues.
I think that's a really interesting point. Ryan, just finally, would you disagree with any of that? Do you think it's better for the coalition to have had these stumbles before the thing begins, that it will sharpen up their approach to the campaign proper?
I reckon it's always better to have bad news happen outside the furnace of an election campaign, David. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. And stories that, might die in a couple of hours, a month ago can go on for 3 or 4 days during a campaign and really sort of set the agenda. I think there's a couple of things which are interesting and very different this time to previous sort of campaigns. Obviously, there's, as I understand it, both major parties are expecting the majority of people to vote before election day, both postal as pre-poll, as well as pre-poll, although obviously the way that the Easter weekend and Anzac Day sort of holidays fall might impact that. And for the first time, well, for the biggest time in history, we've got a huge range of sort of three-way, even four-way contests across the board. The primary votes, the two major parties, is suppressed. You got the rise of the Teals and to a certain extent in particular areas, the Greens as well, although they're sort of coming off in some of their traditional sort of strongholds in Brisbane and perhaps Melbourne as well. So I think those sort of dynamics are going to be interesting. To Andrew's point, like talking to that middle Australia, that outer suburban belt is key to victory for both leaders. All while, we've got the spectre of a fairly unpredictable administration in the US hanging over the campaign for the next 36 days.
No, look, really interesting analysis from both of you, and I do appreciate it. I might, ask you to come back on at the end of the campaign to get your thoughts on how it's all gone. But anyway, we can talk about that offline because I found this really interesting. Andrew Carswell, Ryan Liddell, good to catch up. Thanks both.
Cheers, David.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.